Please give a warm welcome to the host of Broadway Buzz, Mr. Joe Gary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, and welcome to Broadway Buzz, and welcome to our new season. And what a spectacular way to start the season with this extraordinary show, A Beautiful Noise. You know, as Neil Diamond would say, so good, so good, so good. And so it is. You know, we have seen so many musicals like this, where we take someone who had a very inauspicious beginning, very often born in poverty, certainly born in obscurity, and then somehow, in some magical way, they find their voice, they find their music, they find their audience, and they become international superstars. You know, I keep thinking when I watch these shows that we keep seeing, they're really sort of out of Greek mythology. I mean, the idea that we suddenly take this, in the case of Neil Diamond, a young, very shy boy who never left his room until he was 12 years old. I mean, his parents spent his youth worrying that there was something wrong with him. He was so shy and so withdrawn. And then to think of that trajectory of going from absolute obscurity and poverty. I mean, he would change schools 9 times before he got to high school. So it was not an easy life. And yet he was able to become this international superstar who would sell 130 million records, who would create 39 albums, who would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Songwriters Hall of Fame, receive the Kennedy Center honors, and would spend, you know, the end of his life in the greatest kind of glory, having wealth, success, name recognition literally everywhere in the world. So what's fascinating to watch with these stories, I mean, so whether it's Tina Turner, whether it's Michael Jackson, whether it's Donna Summer, whether it's Cher, and in this case, whether it's Neil Diamond, it's fascinating to see in the musical how the story is going to be told. And I believe that the author of this script has done an absolutely extraordinary job of giving us a very fresh view, of giving us a biography in a unique and very special way. We recently remember seeing MJ, the Michael Jackson musical, where the author of that story decided we were going to tell his story through the 3 voices of Michael Jackson: the young boy, the teen idol, and then the superstar. In this case, our author has made a very smart decision. We see Neil now, that is the 83-year-old man who has Parkinson's disease, who is no longer able to perform. He stopped in 2018. So we're really seeing the story is really being told through the eyes of someone we really don't know at all. This man who's sort of in retirement, he continues to write, he continues to be a force in music, but the real force of his life, the idea of touring, is now over. So it's a wonderful treatment, and the choice that the author makes in the telling of this story is, you know, we hear this build-up. The show begins, we have the overture, and it's done very much in a sort of Gershwin style. It's very romantic, very sexy. We start hearing little fragments of songs that we clearly know that have become a part of the fabric of our lives, and we hear these little fragments, and it keeps building and building, and we think the lights are going to come up on the superstar, and instead the lights come up on this elderly man sitting in a chair talking to a psychiatrist. So it's a very, you know, we have to suddenly readjust everything thing and know that we're going to hear this story told in a very different way. In the framework of this story, Neil Diamond has been sent by his third wife, Katie, to go into therapy because she says, you're very difficult to be with. And so in any case, he's sort of reluctant. And the course of the evening, we will see the power of analysis, and we will see the power of a good doctor being able to help us, sort of open the mysteries of our lives. I mean, many of us here obviously are, not at the beginning of our lives, and we're actually looking back on our lives, and that's as interesting as looking ahead to our lives. Only this case, we have the option of saying, oh, it's hard to believe that that person would change my life, or it's hard to believe that that experience would alter the course of my life, or meeting that person would transform my life. Very interesting treatment of how we see this story. So watch very carefully the Neil now, and watch how he grows in power. I mean, these are really scenes that you would see in an Ibsen play. I mean, a doctor is sitting talking to a patient. Her choice is, she decides that she's going to take the collection of Neil Diamond's lyrics and open the book to any one page and speak to her client about that particular song or those particular lyrics. And the irony is of what happens in the framework of this show is we start hearing this music in an absolutely new way. So be very conscious. What's very clever about this show, again, the book writer has given some songs not to Neil Diamond then, the young superstar stud, but he gives the songs to one of the wives, to a woman who would impact his life by being his producer, and it totally transforms the song, and it totally transforms the message, and it opens up the world of the subject that we have here, Neil Diamond, in a very extraordinary way. Okay, so let me just go to the beginning for you. Neil Diamond was born in 1941 in Brooklyn. He was never very far from Coney Island. The family moved often. His grandparents were immigrants, Russian and Polish. There's a brilliant song that you will hear that is sort of a tribute to his immigrant parents called America, which is one of his great songs. It almost becomes our anthem. We've used it so often, and we relate to it in such an emotional way. So his roots are very important to him. His parents, again, struggled because, they were in the new world, struggling to find a way. They kept moving. They spent 5 years when his father was in the Army in Cheyenne, Wyoming. At that point, Neil Diamond was certain that he was going to become a cowboy, and we never would have heard from him ever after. But in any case, that wasn't to be. And then we start seeing these forces that really impact our lives, these crossroad moments in our lives. When he was a young boy, he was sent to a Jewish camp in the Catskills. It was called Lake Surprise Camp. And there, kids studied writing songs, and they learned how to write music. And the great performer Pete Seeger visited the camp and performed for the kids. And then he said, share with me the songs you've written. And he gave them advice about how to change the tempo, or how to change the key, or how to change the arrangement to make it a better song. And of course, at this point, Neil Diamond was much too shy to participate in that. But it would be a moment that would transform his life. When he came home from that camp, his parents saved up money, bought him a used guitar, and that would set him on the trajectory of his life. When he was in high school, he went to Erasmus Hall High. He had several famous classmates at that period. Bobby Fischer, who was one of the great chess champions, was a student there. Herb Cohen, who would go on to be an Olympic fencer and win a gold medal, would influence Neil Diamond, talk him into joining the fencing team, which was the only moment he had in high school of any kind of celebrity. He was very good at it. In fact, he was given a scholarship to go to NYU, where he entered the pre-med program, but on a fencing scholarship. And Herb was his classmate at NYU also. But also his most famous companion in high school was Barbra Streisand. And keep in mind, he said, our only connection was we would occasionally get caught smoking cigarettes outside the school. That was their connection. He would write poetry, and it was his first claim to fame. He was really too shy to talk to young girls, so he would slip them a poem, and that was very beguiling, you know, and I mean, young girls were very flattered that this really handsome but shy young boy was sending them a little love poem. And then all the boys in school got jealous, and they said, well, we want to do this too, but we can't write. So he would write poems for all the boys in school. So he became popular because of his writing. And so the boys liked him because he wrote little poems for them that they could pass on to their squeezes, and he would do the same with the young girls. I never found out in the reading if he sent a poem to Barbra Streisand, but I suspect she would have thrown it away anyway. So anyway, but years later, of course, they would become very connected in their lives. He would write a brilliant song, You Don't Send Me Flowers, you know, which is one of the great ballads of the day. Everybody sang it. And they finally did a duet of it, which was one of the most popular duets that was ever created in the music industry. So they did find their connection, even though they didn't smoke outside the high school. Okay, so when Neil Diamond fell in love with a young girl, Jay, they would marry, and he was in pre-med school, and he was in his 4th year, but he was so obsessed with songwriting. First of all, as I told you, it started out writing poetry and then simply writing. I mean, he's always been a sort of poet-philosopher, and so this is always in his being, but always too shy to share it really with anyone except his classmates. But finally, when he was in college, he would go down to the Brill Building, which is at 49th Street and Broadway. Many of you remember this is really the song factory in New York. You remember the great Carole King musical, Beautiful, that we all saw. She spent her youth locked in a little booth in the Brill Building where she kept turning out songs every day. It literally was a factory. And so he was so impressed with this, and he so wanted to be in that world that he started submitting songs, and he started getting some interest back. I mean, he would sell a song a week and make about $30 doing that. The songs wouldn't really go anywhere, but they were sold and passed on, and that's how the system worked in the Brill Building. But finally, right before he was ready to graduate from pre-med school, so he's 10 credits short of graduation, and as you know, pre-med is a very difficult program. Keep in mind, he's married. Keep in mind, he's also trying to support a child, and he has a scholarship because of his fencing, but nonetheless, and he's making this small amount of money from the Brill Building. But finally, a music publishing company gives him a 16-week contract where he was going to make $50 a week. So he dropped out of pre-med school, 10 credits short of graduation. Years later, after he became a great superstar, NYU gave him an honorary undergraduate degree. I'm sure he gave them back a huge amount of money, but that's another story. All right, but in any case, so he starts in this career, the contract goes for 16 weeks, and they withdraw it. And so he's in very desperate shape. I want you to be aware that people come into our lives that transform our lives. I always say, when you talk about about anyone being successful in the arts, I always say it's two things, talent and luck. And the luck part of this came when he would meet Ellie Greenwich. Watch for her in the story. She's a wonderful character. She plays a very important part in the first act of the story. She is a producer, and he meets her at the Brill Building. And she says, okay, I'll give you, she's a very tough woman and a very smart woman, and she places songs wonderfully. She knew everyone in the business. And so she said to him, you'll see a beautiful scene in the first act where she says, I'll give you 5 minutes. And so he sings her the songs he has, and she finally taps into something. But what you start seeing, what's wonderful about the development of the first act of this story is you're not seeing the Neil Diamond you're seeing the Neil Diamond who will become the Neil Diamond that you know. And he's very insecure, and he's very unsure of himself. He only thinks of himself as a songwriter. Up to this point, he never considered that he would be a singer or a performer. So she started taking his material, and she was able to place it with the Monkees, with Elvis Presley, and suddenly he started to become very successful as a songwriter. He couldn't afford to have someone else record his music, so he would record the demos that he would give to Ellie that she would pass around, saying, listen to this great song, look what we can do with it, and then they'd record it. And so Ellie started hearing his voice saying, this is really an extraordinary baritone voice. It's raspy, it's a unique sound. No one sounds like that in the professional business. We're going to stop giving your songs away, and we're going to start having you perform your songs. Well, this terrified him. I mean, he was very unaccustomed to this. So Ellie, knowing everyone in New York, arranged for him to meet Fred Weintraub, another wonderful character you meet in the first act of the story. He ran a wonderful tiny space called the Bitter End in New York on Bleecker Street. It was about 180-seat space. It probably had never been cleaned, but it's where Peter, Paul, and Mary started, and a lot of our, Bob Dylan started there, a lot of our great stars started at the Bitter End, Barbra Streisand also. So the end result was that she arranged for a meeting with Neil Diamond and Fred, and he was going to perform that evening at the Bitter End. And so he arrived in a black shirt and black pants, and Fred said, well, where's the costume you're going to wear when you perform? And he said, well, this is it. I want to be in black. And he said, if you're in black, you're going to disappear. And the response that Neil gave was, I don't want anyone to look at me. And Fred said, well, that's sort of the point, isn't it? And so they threw him on the stage and watched that scene. It's very, very touching. And it's really how his career began. And he would remain very devoted to the Bitter End. I mean, keep in mind, Woody Allen, Billy Crystal, large numbers of stars were developed there at the Bitter End, especially in the heyday of the 1960s. So that was how Neil Diamond started his career. And so by this point now, he's married, he has 2 children, his songs start taking off. He performs a hit song that he sings himself, Solitary Man, and that starts his career. And that, of course, is a perfect title for his life. He always, even though he was married 3 times, even though he has 4 children that he adores, even though he does have a private life that he profoundly admires, he was always cut off from the family, from everyone around him. He was this very insular being. And of course, we hear it in all of his music and all of his lyrics. It's what appeals to us about the extraordinary music that he creates. Okay, he signs up with a group to publish and to record his music. Unfortunately, it's called Bang Music, and it's run by by gangsters, and the logo is a gun. So, I mean, he should have been aware that this is very dangerous territory to be in. There are wonderful scenes in the first act that show you this, and you watch it and you go, oh, come on. But it's really true. It's exactly what happened. He gets caught with the group. They won't release him. They're making a lot of money with these singles he's coming out with, but he was a very serious artist and wanted to move in a new direction and wanted to write very introspective songs. And there was a key song at the time called Shiloh. And it was a very serious song about his having an imaginary friend as a child, since he had no one to connect with. And it was a song that is very personal and private to him. And they went, oh, give me a break. We're not going to publish a song like this. And so he wants to break with them, and he tries to get out of the contract. And then the mafia comes in and says, you know, you don't get out of a contract with the mafia. And so he finally hides himself away. They try to bomb the bitter end. They do bomb the bitter end. Actually, no one's hurt. But in any case, it's a warning. He locks himself away, and he makes a deal that if he can come up with 3 songs that will be hit songs, they'll release him from his contract. He has 2 songs. He's an hour away from the time he has to record. There's a wonderful scene near the end of the first act that shows us this. And he's desperate. He's in a room, and he can't come up with what is the 3rd song going to be. He looks at Life magazine. There's a photograph of Carolyn Kennedy in her riding outfit, and he writes Sweet Caroline. And of course, he's then released from the mafia, and his whole life will take another turn, which will include divorcing his first wife, leaving the family that he loves, and then going on the road forever. So Act 2 sets us up then with the idea of Neil Diamond superstar. And we have seen in the process all the anxiety, all the frustration, and we keep hearing as we go back to these scenes where we see Neil now with his psychiatrist, talking to the psychiatrist about what's happening in his life, and then using the lyrics to help interpret it. Watch very carefully. Again, the book writer in this show is so clever. Let me just pause. I want to tell you some things about Anthony McCarten. He's basically known as a film biographer. He's done many commercial films, taking famous lives and developing them. I think a perfect film festival for you, some weekend when we're snowed in this winter, is to go to Netflix and pull up all the Anthony McCarten films and look at them. But they will include a brilliant film called The Theory of Everything that's about Stephen Hawking. And as you remember, Stephen Hawking was the astrophysicist who was a quadriplegic, and Eddie Redmayne gives the most astonishing film performance. One of the things I want you to know about Anthony McCarten that is very impactful in the show you're going to see is that he writes biographies in the way a great Pulitzer Prize biographer would in literature. He wrote them mostly for movies. This is his first venture into doing it on stage, in doing it for the Neil Diamond Show. But then in film, he would do Bohemian Rhapsody, which was about Freddie Mercury and the group called Queen. He would do a brilliant take on Winston Churchill called The Darkest Hours. I worked for 10 years on cruise ships, and one of the theater pieces we did was a piece on Winston Churchill. And we were always really at the cutting edge, working really hard, because we'd have scholars from Oxford talking about Winston Churchill and world-class authorities, and here we were doing this little musical. But I can tell you, when I saw The Darkest Hour as a film, even though I'd read all of the Churchill material, both firsthand and biography and autobiography, that it was really Anthony McCarten that gave me the greatest insight into Churchill. He also did a brilliant film called Brilliance about Thomas Edison. So he's the perfect person to be doing this work on Neil Diamond and to expose his life in a new way, in this case through therapy. Watch carefully, especially, the first act is really just sort of a setup for it, and we're really getting the Neil now into connecting with the psychologist, but watch what happens in the second act, and watch how it pays off, and watch those brilliant monologues. I mean, keep in mind, in the middle of a big Broadway musical, suddenly we have the stage with just two people sitting in chairs talking near the climax of the show. And it's some of the most powerful writing, and it's when we really do understand who our subject really is. And it's very powerful in that regard. Okay, I'd like to talk about the making then of this musical. Keep in mind, the producers would really put together an extraordinary team. So we have Ken Davenport, who's one of the two primary producers. Ken Davenport has done over 20 years of Broadway shows. He won the Tony Award for Kinky Boots. You can read his resume in the program. But he's very skilled, very knowledgeable. But it's really Bob Gaudio, who's the other producer, that makes a very big impression on this show. Bob Gaudio, of course, was part of the Jersey Boys. He was the one who created the Jersey Boys. He was part of that group. He owns half of the franchise of the Frankie Valli songbook. And also he had produced 9 of Neil Diamond's albums. He's a major producer, a record producer, and extremely knowledgeable. And he gave us one of the great jukebox musicals, Jersey Boys. So he's very smart and very wise in what they put together here. And of course, the first great hire was the hiring of Anthony McCartan to write the book. And he would work very carefully with Neil Diamond for a long period of time in coming up with this format of making it a psychiatric session where slowly Neil Diamond comes to epiphanies about his life. And just watch how that's developed in the storyline. It's like we're really watching a play and then we're watching a musical, but they're integrated so brilliantly. The next thing that would happen then is they would hire Michael Mayer as the director. You've just seen Michael Mayer's work in Funny Girl, but you know it from Hedwig and the Angry Inch, American Idiot, a thoroughly modern Millie, a wide range of shows. He's enormously successful. I was very connected with him in the early 1980s in New York when he was a young actor, and he was playing the lead role in a play about Kafka. And I was very involved in that process. And we've remained friends ever since. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, I went to New York. Michael just had an opening. He opened the Metropolitan Opera by directing this new work called Grounded, which is based on the play Grounded, and opened the Metropolitan Opera season. And he's given us a definitive staging using very cutting-edge visual techniques, and really brings the opera into the 21st century. It's really extraordinary and groundbreaking work for him. So he's the director of this piece. And again, he's exceedingly clever in staging and integrating storyline, music, and dance. Stephen Hoggett is the choreographer. He's really more than a choreographer. I first knew Stephen Hoggett at the Edinburgh Festival many years ago when he did a work that was called Black Watch. And he was really using staging, what we would think of as choreography, but he would use staging to tell a story. He's become so successful that he's been used by all the great productions. The Harry Potter shows that are playing in New York, he staged. Large numbers of pieces at the National Theater, A Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, he staged. He worked with Michael Mayer when they worked on American Idiot, which is a very interesting stage production. But again, when you watch his work today, it really isn't traditional original choreography. It's really quite extraordinary, and he uses the dancers as storytellers. In this work, the dancers are called the Noise. And watch how they first appear. It's very magical. They just sort of come out of the furniture, and they become Neil Diamond's memories. They become fragments of his songs. They become fragments of his life. And so it's a very stream of consciousness technique. And of course, Stephen Hoggett is masterful in being able to do this. David Rockefeller did these sets, and he's an architect, but also a great set designer. And just watch how powerful the set is, and then especially note what happens in the second act when we really turn the whole show into a rock concert. So extraordinary work all around. So you're in for a very special and unique treat. Again, I can't stress strongly enough how impressed I am with the storytelling, of how they tell the story through the idea of therapy, through the idea of dance, through the idea of memory and stream of consciousness, and all of this comes together. We see the full-blown star, and it's wonderfully played by the actor who played it in New York. And after 2 minutes, you think you're watching Neil Diamond, and you're so caught up into that world. But the real truth of the story comes from the Neil now, the 83-year-old man with Parkinson's, who's literally looking back on his life. And what an extraordinary life it has been. So please enjoy a beautiful Noise. Thank you.